Hi, this is Nancy. I serve as a spokesperson for Nehemiah Reset. Today I want to play a recording of James, a citizen from the state of Minnesota who recently commented about Amy Klobuchar, running for governor for Minnesota. Here's what he had to say about the situation.
Hi, this is James. I'm a resident of Minnesota and want to comment on a recent news article about the politics in Minnesota. In the article, they indicated that Amy Klobuchar appears to have decided to run for governor of Minnesota. This stunning political development has sent shockwaves throughout Minnesota's political landscape. According to the article, U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar has taken the first formal steps toward running for governor of her home state. This move comes just weeks after fellow Democrat Tim Walz abruptly ended his campaign for a third term, leaving a Democrat power vacuum at a time when Minnesota faces unprecedented challenges. The timing of Klobuchar's potential gubernatorial bid raises critical questions about her motivations, her connection to the ongoing fraud scandals that have rocked the state, and whether her candidacy represents a calculated attempt by the Democratic Party to control the narrative surrounding Walz's embattled administration. As the state grapples with federal investigations, immigration controversies, and public outrage over alleged mismanagement, Klobuchar's decision to potentially trade her influential Senate seat for the governor's mansion demands careful examination. First, should we talk about the unraveling of Governor Tim Walz? Governor Tim Walz's political downfall has been as swift as it has been dramatic. Once considered a rising star in the Democratic Party, having served as Kamala Harris's running mate in the 2024 presidential election, Walz now finds himself at the center of multiple investigations that have effectively ended his gubernatorial ambitions. The primary catalyst for his political demise appears to be a massive welfare fraud scandal that has drawn national attention to Minnesota's state-run social programs. According to reports, widespread fraud allegations have resulted in billions of dollars being lost, with critics accusing Walz of failing to prevent misconduct and then attempting to cover up the extent of the problem once it came to light. The fraud investigation alone would be enough to cripple any administration, but Walz's troubles extend far beyond financial mismanagement. The Department of Justice has opened investigations into at least 5 Democratic officials in Minnesota, including Walz himself and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, for allegedly obstructing immigration enforcement. These investigations come at a time when Minnesota has become a flashpoint in the national immigration debate, following President Trump's deployment of 2,000 federal agents to carry out large-scale immigration operations in the state. The situation escalated dramatically in early January when protests against these raids resulted in the fatal shooting of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3, by an immigration and customs enforcement agent. Walz's handling of these crises has drawn fierce criticism from both Republicans and members of his own party. His defiant statement, "Over my dead body," in response to GOP calls for his resignation over the fraud scandal, only further entrenched opposition to his continued leadership. As public confidence in his administration plummeted, Walz made the stunning decision to withdraw from the governor's race, claiming he needed to focus on addressing the intensifying fraud scandal. This abrupt exit created a political vacuum that Democrats were desperate to fill before the crisis could benefit Republican candidates in the upcoming election. Stepping into this political vacuum is Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar's entrance into the gubernatorial race cannot be understood without examining her impressive political trajectory and reputation as one of Minnesota's most formidable Democrats. Born in Plymouth, Minnesota, Klobuchar is the daughter of legendary Minnesota journalist Jim Klobuchar, giving her deep roots in the state's political and media landscape. Her educational credentials are equally impressive. She studied law at both Yale University and the University of Chicago before embarking on a career that would see her become one of Minnesota's most trusted political figures. Klobuchar's political career began in earnest when she was elected Hennepin County Attorney in 1999, making her responsible for all criminal prosecution in Minnesota's most populous county. During her tenure as county attorney, she developed a reputation as a tough but fair prosecutor who wasn't afraid to take on difficult cases. One of her most notable achievements came in 2002 when she spearheaded an effort to alter state laws to allow felony charges against repeat drunk driving offenders. In 2003, she handled one of her highest-profile cases when her office brought charges against former professional baseball player Kirby Puckett related to an alleged sex crime, a decision that drew criticism from some who questioned her use of grand juries as potentially lacking transparency. Klobuchar's election to the U.S. Senate in 2006 marked a historic moment for Minnesota, as she became the state's first elected female United States Senator, succeeding Mark Dayton. During her time in the Senate, she has built a reputation as a pragmatic moderate who works across party lines while maintaining strong Democratic credentials. She currently serves as chair of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee and previously chaired the Committee on Rules and Administration, positions that reflect her standing within the party leadership. Her political success in Minnesota is undeniable. She has won all 4 of her Senate elections by healthy margins, with her closest challenge coming in 2024 when she still won by a comfortable 16 points. Despite her success, Klobuchar's presidential ambitions were thwarted during the 2020 Democratic primaries, where she struggled to gain traction beyond her Midwestern base. This experience, combined with her current position as the third-ranking Democrat in Senate leadership, has led some observers to question whether she faces a glass ceiling in Washington that might make the Minnesota governorship an attractive alternative. The governor's office would allow her to exercise executive power in a way she never could as a senator, potentially positioning her for another presidential run in the future. Is the timing of her run for governor coincidence or calculation? The timing of Amy Klobuchar's decision to enter the governor's race raises legitimate questions about whether her candidacy is part of a coordinated effort to control the fallout from the scandals engulfing the Walz administration. According to reports, Walz made his decision to drop out of the race just a day after meeting with Klobuchar and apparently trying to push her as a successor. This sequence of events suggests a level of coordination that goes beyond mere coincidence, fueling speculation that Klobuchar's candidacy might have been orchestrated by Democratic Party leaders as a damage control measure. Political analysts widely expected Klobuchar to enter the race after Walz dropped out, particularly as pressure mounted regarding the fraud allegations. The fact that she filed preliminary paperwork with the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board just weeks after Walz's announcement indicates a well-orchestrated entry rather than a spontaneous decision. This rapid response suggests that Klobuchar may have been preparing for this possibility even before Walz officially withdrew, potentially indicating that Democratic leaders were already planning for a transition as the scandals intensified. The fraud scandal itself provides crucial context for understanding the political dynamics at play. The allegations center around widespread misconduct in Minnesota's state-run social programs, with estimates suggesting billions of dollars have been lost to fraudulent activities. Critics have accused Walz of not only failing to prevent the fraud, but also of attempting to downplay its significance once it came to light. Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth, who is running for governor as a Republican, has been particularly critical, stating, regardless of who they put on the ticket in 2026, the Democrat, whoever that is just another third term of Tim Walz. This sentiment captures the challenge facing any Democratic candidate seeking to succeed Walz: how to distance themselves from his administration's failures while still maintaining party unity. Klobuchar's reputation as a moderate who works across party lines might make her an ideal candidate for the Democrats to navigate this political minefield. However, her close relationship with Walz and the apparent coordination around her entry into the race will undoubtedly lead opponents to question whether she represents genuine change or simply a more palatable face for the same problematic policies. The coming months will reveal whether Minnesota voters view her candidacy as a fresh start or as a calculated attempt to protect the Democratic establishment from further scrutiny. How will the fraud scandal impact the crisis of Democratic governance in Minnesota? To fully understand the political landscape that Klobuchar is stepping into, it's essential to examine the fraud scandal that has so thoroughly tarnished the Walz administration. The allegations extend beyond simple mismanagement to suggest systemic failures in oversight and accountability within Minnesota's social programs. While exact details remain somewhat murky due to ongoing investigations, reports indicate that fraud involves multiple state agencies and may have been occurring for years before being discovered. What makes this scandal particularly damaging for Democrats is that it appears to have disproportionately affected vulnerable populations who rely on these social programs for necessities. The irony is thick programs designed to provide a safety net for Minnesota's most vulnerable residents that may have been systematically exploited, potentially diverting billions of dollars away from those who genuinely needed them. This situation strikes at the heart of the Democratic Party's self-proclaimed commitment to social justice and economic equality, making it difficult for party leaders to defend their record on these issues. Governor Walz's response to the scandal has only compounded the damage. Rather than taking swift action to address the problems and hold those responsible accountable, he appears to have initially downplayed the severity of the situation. This pattern of denial and minimization continued until the evidence became so overwhelming that it could no longer be ignored. By the time Walz took action, public trust in his administration had already been severely eroded. The political fallout from this scandal extends beyond Walz himself. At least 5 Democratic officials in Minnesota are now under investigation by the Department of Justice, including Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. This suggests that the problems may be systemic within the state's Democratic establishment rather than limited to one administration or agency. For voters already frustrated with political corruption, this widespread investigation confirms their worst fears about a party that has grown complacent after years of electoral success in Minnesota. It's against this backdrop that Amy Klobuchar must make her case to voters. She will need to make the case that she represents a break from the past rather than a continuation of it. Her challenge is formidable. How can she distance herself from a party and administration with which she has been closely aligned throughout her career? The answer to this question will likely determine whether her gubernatorial ambitions succeed or fail. While the welfare fraud scandal has dominated headlines, Minnesota's immigration crisis has emerged as a second, equally explosive front in the state's political turmoil. The situation escalated dramatically in January 2026 when President Trump deployed 2,000 federal agents to Minnesota for large-scale immigration raids, making the state a central battleground in the nation's contentious immigration debate. These operations were met with fierce resistance from Democratic officials, including Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who publicly pledged to protect immigrant communities from federal enforcement actions. The tension between state and federal authorities reached a tragic climax on January 5, 2026, when protests against the immigration raids turned violent. During the confrontation, an immigration and customs enforcement agent fatally shot Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3 who was participating in the demonstration. The incident sparked outrage across Minnesota and reignited national debate about immigration enforcement tactics. For many Minnesotans, the tragedy represented the dangerous consequences of the escalating rhetoric and policies coming from both Washington, D.C. and the state capitol. The Department of Justice has since opened investigations into at least 5 Democratic officials, including Walz and Frey, for allegedly obstructing immigration enforcement. These investigations center on accusations that state and local leaders actively work to impede federal agents' efforts to detain and deport undocumented immigrants, potentially violating federal law. The situation has created a constitutional crisis of sorts, with states' rights advocates pitted against federal immigration authorities in a battle that has far-reaching implications beyond Minnesota's borders. For Amy Klobuchar, the immigration controversy presents a particularly delicate political challenge. As a U.S. Senator, she has previously voted against increased funding for border security, a position that aligns with Democratic priorities but may not reflect the views of more moderate Minnesota voters. At the same time, her reputation as a pragmatic problem solver suggests she might be able to find a middle ground that respects both federal authority and state concerns. The question is whether she can successfully navigate this complex issue without alienating either the progressive base of her party or the moderate voters who will be crucial in a gubernatorial election. The immigration crisis also intersects with the fraud scandal in ways that may prove politically damaging to Klobuchar. Critics have pointed to potential connections between the two issues, suggesting that a state administration incapable of preventing billions in welfare fraud might also be incapable of managing the complex challenges posed by federal immigration enforcement. This narrative, if it takes hold with voters, could prove devastating to Klobuchar's gubernatorial ambitions, regardless of her actual involvement in either scandal. Democratic Party's response to Minnesota's twin crises reveals much about their strategic priorities and their assessment of the political landscape. Governor Walz's abrupt decision to withdraw from the governor's race came just a day after meeting with Amy Klobuchar and apparently attempting to push her as a successor. This sequence of events suggests a level of coordination that goes beyond mere coincidence, fueling speculation that Klobuchar's candidacy might have been orchestrated by Democratic Party leaders as a damage control measure. Political analysts widely expected Klobuchar to enter the race after Walz dropped out, particularly as pressure mounted regarding the fraud allegations. The fact that she filed preliminary paperwork with the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board just weeks after Walz's announcement indicates a well-orchestrated entry rather than a spontaneous decision. This rapid response suggests that Klobuchar may have been preparing for this possibility even before Walz officially withdrew, potentially indicating that Democratic leaders were already planning for a transition as the scandals intensified. The Democratic Party's motivations in promoting Klobuchar's candidacy appear to be twofold. First, they recognize that Walz has become politically toxic and that his continued presence on the ticket would likely lead to defeat in 2026. Second, they believe that Klobuchar's reputation as a moderate who works across party lines gives them the best chance of retaining the governor's office despite the scandals. This calculation reflects a pragmatic approach to electoral politics, but it also raises questions about whether the party is more interested in maintaining power than in addressing the substantive problems that have emerged under their leadership. The other issue that the National Democratic Party may be concerned about is that the administration will continue the investigation into all these social programs in more Democratic-controlled states other than Minnesota. Issues have already been noticed in the state of Maine and the immigrant community there. The Democrats hope that if Amy Klobuchar wins the governorship in Minnesota, and it may stop or slow further investigations into these programs in other states. Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth, who is running for governor as a Republican, has been particularly critical of this strategy, stating, regardless of who they put on the ticket in 2026, the Democrat, whoever that is just another third term of Tim Walz. This sentiment captures the challenge facing any Democratic candidate seeking to succeed Walz: how to distance themselves from his administration's failures while still maintaining party unity. DeMuth's criticism highlights the Republican strategy to tie any Democratic candidate directly to Walz's record, regardless of their actual involvement in the scandals. The Democratic Party's decision to rally around Klobuchar also reflects broader national dynamics. With Republicans controlling the White House and making gains in Congress, state-level offices have become increasingly important battlegrounds. Losing the Minnesota governorship would be a significant blow to Democratic power in the Midwest and would complicate their efforts to mount an effective opposition to the Trump administration's policies. From this perspective, Klobuchar's candidacy can be seen as part of a larger strategy to protect Democratic interests at a time when the party is facing existential challenges at the national level. How do Minnesota voters view Klobuchar's gubernatorial ambitions? The critical question facing Amy Klobuchar as she contemplates a run for governor is how Minnesota voters will perceive her dramatic shift from the U.S. Senate to a state-level executive position. The answer to this question will likely determine whether her gubernatorial ambitions succeed or fail. Early indications suggest that public reaction is divided along predictable partisan lines, with Democrats generally supportive and Republicans deeply skeptical. For Democratic voters, Klobuchar represents a familiar and trusted figure who has consistently delivered electoral victories for the party in Minnesota. Her track record of winning all 4 of her Senate elections by healthy margins, her closest challenge coming in 2024 when she still won by a comfortable 16 points, demonstrates her enduring appeal across the state. Many Democrats view her as the party's best hope of retaining the governor's office in the face of mounting scandals and Republican enthusiasm. Her reputation as a moderate who works across party lines while maintaining strong Democratic credentials makes her an attractive candidate for voters concerned about both effective governance and ideological representation. Republican voters, however, view Klobuchar's candidacy through a much more cynical lens. They see her potential gubernatorial run as a calculated attempt by the Democratic establishment to distract from the failures of the Walz administration and maintain power despite overwhelming evidence of mismanagement and corruption. Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth's characterization of any Democratic candidate as just another third term of Tim Walz reflects this perspective and will likely be a central theme of Republican campaign messaging in the coming months. Independent and moderate voters will likely prove decisive in determining the outcome of the 2026 gubernatorial race. These voters tend to be less ideological and more focused on practical concerns about effective governance and accountability. For them, the key question will be whether Klobuchar can convincingly position herself as a break from the past rather than a continuation of the problems that have plagued the Walz administration. Her reputation as a pragmatic problem solver may help her make this case, but she will need to directly address the fraud scandal and immigration controversy in ways that acknowledge their seriousness while offering concrete solutions. The timing of Klobuchar's potential candidacy also presents a challenge in terms of public perception. Some voters may question why she would choose to leave an influential position in the U.S. Senate, where she currently serves as the third-ranking Democrat in Senate leadership, to run for governor at a time when the state is facing such significant challenges. The narrative that she is simply trying to protect the Democratic establishment from further scrutiny could resonate with voters already frustrated with political corruption and looking for genuine change rather than cosmetic alterations to the status quo. Beyond the political considerations, Amy Klobuchar's potential run for governor raises important legal and procedural questions about the transition from the U.S. Senate to a state executive position. The most immediate question is whether she must resign from her Senate position before running for governor, or if she can be elected and resign before taking office to give the position to a potentially Democratic elected lieutenant governor. The answer to this question depends on Minnesota's specific election laws and the U.S. Constitution's provisions regarding Senate qualifications. Generally speaking, there is no constitutional requirement that a sitting senator resign before seeking another office, though some states have laws that address this situation. In Minnesota's case, the relevant statutes would determine whether Klobuchar could remain in the Senate throughout the campaign and only resign if elected, or whether she would need to step down earlier to comply with state election laws. The succession planning for her Senate seat adds another layer of complexity to this situation. If Klobuchar were to resign after being elected governor, but before taking office, Minnesota's Democratic governor would appoint a replacement to serve until a special election could be held. This scenario could potentially allow Democrats to maintain control of both the governor's office and the Senate seat, though it would depend on the timing of any resignation and the specific requirements of Minnesota law regarding special elections. There is also the question of whether Klobuchar might be able to coordinate with the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in a way that would ensure party control of both positions if their ticket is successful. This kind of political maneuvering, while legal, could be perceived by voters as cynical power brokering rather than public service. The optics of such an arrangement would be particularly damaging given the ongoing investigations into Democratic governance in the state, as it would reinforce the narrative that party leaders are more interested in maintaining power than in addressing the substantive problems facing Minnesota. The legal framework governing these transitions is complex, and Klobuchar will need to carefully navigate the requirements to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Her reputation as a former prosecutor and her attention to detail as a senator suggest she will be diligent in ensuring compliance with all relevant laws and regulations. However, in the current political climate, even technically legal arrangements can be politically damaging if they appear to prioritize party interests over those of the public. Another procedural consideration relates to the timing of the Democratic primary and the general election. Minnesota's political calendar will play a crucial role in determining how much time Klobuchar has to make her case to voters and how quickly she can transition from a Senate campaign to a gubernatorial one if she decides to run. The compressed timeline could prove challenging, particularly given the need to address the complex issues surrounding the fraud scandal and immigration controversy in a way that satisfies both Democratic primary voters and the general electorate. The Republican response to this situation represents an unprecedented opportunity for the GOP. For Minnesota Republicans, the twin crises engulfing the Walz administration and Amy Klobuchar's potential entry into the governor's race represent an unprecedented opportunity to break the Democratic Party's long-standing dominance in state politics. After years of playing second fiddle to Democrats in statewide elections, Republicans now find themselves with a realistic chance of reclaiming the governor's office and potentially reshaping the state's political landscape for years to come. The Republican strategy has already begun to take shape, with Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth emerging as one of the party's early frontrunners for the gubernatorial nomination. DeMuth's approach has been to tie any Democratic candidate directly to the failures of the Walz administration, regardless of their actual involvement in the scandals. Her statement that, regardless of who they put on the ticket in 2026, the Democrat, whoever that is just another third term of Tim Walz captures this strategy perfectly. This messaging is designed to overcome Klobuchar's significant name recognition and reputation as a moderate by framing her candidacy as a continuation of the same failed policies that have led to the current crises. Beyond the political considerations, Amy Klobuchar's potential run for governor raises important legal and procedural questions about the transition from the U.S. Senate to a state executive position. The most immediate question is whether she must resign from her Senate position before running for governor, or if she can be elected and resign before taking office to give the position to a potentially Democratic elected lieutenant governor. The answer to this question depends on Minnesota's specific election laws and the U.S. Constitution's provisions regarding Senate qualifications. Generally speaking, there is no constitutional requirement that a sitting senator resign before seeking another office, though some states have laws that address this situation. In Minnesota's case, the relevant statutes would determine whether Klobuchar could remain in the Senate throughout the campaign and only resign if elected, or whether she would need to step down earlier to comply with state election laws. The succession planning for her Senate seat adds another layer of complexity to this situation. If Klobuchar were to resign after being elected governor, but before taking office, Minnesota's Democratic governor would appoint a replacement to serve until a special election could be held. This scenario could potentially allow Democrats to maintain control of both the governor's office and the Senate seat, though it would depend on the timing of any resignation and the specific requirements of Minnesota law regarding special elections. There is also the question of whether Klobuchar might be able to coordinate with the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in a way that would ensure party control of both positions if their ticket is successful. This kind of political maneuvering, while legal, could be perceived by voters as cynical power brokering rather than public service. The optics of such an arrangement would be particularly damaging given the ongoing investigations into Democratic governance in the state, as it would reinforce the narrative that party leaders are more interested in maintaining power than in addressing the substantive problems facing Minnesota. The legal framework governing these transitions is complex, and Klobuchar will need to carefully navigate the requirements to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Her reputation as a former prosecutor and her attention to detail as a senator suggest she will be diligent in ensuring compliance with all relevant laws and regulations. However, in the current political climate, even technically legal arrangements can be politically damaging if they appear to prioritize party interests over those of the public. Another procedural consideration relates to the timing of the Democratic primary and the general election. Minnesota's political calendar will play a crucial role in determining how much time Klobuchar has to make her case to voters and how quickly she can transition from a Senate campaign to a gubernatorial one if she decides to run. The compressed timeline could prove challenging, particularly given the need to address the complex issues surrounding the fraud scandal and immigration controversy in a way that satisfies both Democratic primary voters and the general electorate. The Republican response to this situation represents an unprecedented opportunity for the GOP. For Minnesota Republicans, the twin crises engulfing the Walz administration and Amy Klobuchar's potential entry into the governor's race represent an unprecedented opportunity to break the Democratic Party's long-standing dominance in state politics. After years of playing second fiddle to Democrats in statewide elections, Republicans now find themselves with a realistic chance of reclaiming the governor's office and potentially reshaping the state's political landscape for years to come. The Republican strategy has already begun to take shape, with Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth emerging as one of the party's early frontrunners for the gubernatorial nomination. DeMuth's approach has been to tie any Democratic candidate directly to the failures of the Walz administration, regardless of their actual involvement in the scandals. Her statement that, regardless of who they put on the ticket in 2026, the Democrat, whoever that is just another third term of Tim Walz, captures this strategy perfectly. This messaging is designed to overcome Klobuchar's significant name recognition and reputation as a moderate by framing her candidacy as a continuation of the same failed policies that have led to the current crises. Republicans are also likely to focus heavily on the immigration controversy, contrasting the Democratic approach of resistance to federal enforcement with a more law and order stance that appeals to moderate voters concerned about public safety and the rule of law. The tragic death of Renee Good during the January protests will likely feature prominently in Republican campaign materials as evidence of the dangerous consequences of the Democratic approach to immigration. This line of attack could prove particularly effective in suburban and rural areas of the state, where immigration is a more salient issue than in the urban core. The fraud scandal provides another powerful line of attack for Republicans, who can portray themselves as the party of fiscal responsibility and good governance in contrast to the alleged corruption and mismanagement of the Democratic administration. By emphasizing the sheer scale of the fraud, potentially billions of dollars, and the failure of Democratic leaders to prevent it or hold those responsible accountable, Republicans can appeal to voters across the political spectrum who are concerned about the effective use of their tax dollars. Perhaps most importantly, Republicans have the opportunity to present themselves as the party of change and reform at a time when many Minnesotans are frustrated with the status quo. By offering concrete proposals for addressing both the welfare fraud and immigration controversies, Republicans can position themselves as the party with practical solutions rather than just political rhetoric. This approach could be particularly effective with independent and moderate voters who are less ideological and more focused on results. Into these circumstances step the media, who will be charged to cover Klobuchar's gubernatorial ambitions. The media's role in covering Amy Klobuchar's potential run for governor will be crucial in shaping public perception of her candidacy and the broader political dynamics in Minnesota. Given the high stakes involved and the complexity of the issues at play, journalists face the challenge of providing comprehensive coverage that both informs the public and holds political leaders accountable without descending into sensationalism or partisan bias. The fraud scandal and immigration controversy present particular challenges for journalists seeking to provide accurate and balanced coverage. These issues involve complex legal and policy questions that require careful explanation to avoid oversimplification or misrepresentation. The ongoing nature of the investigations adds another layer of complexity, as reporters must balance the need to report new developments with the danger of jumping to conclusions before all the facts are known. Klobuchar's relationship with the media will also be a factor in how her candidacy is covered. As the daughter of legendary Minnesota journalist Jim Klobuchar and a longtime public figure in the state. She has extensive experience with the media and generally maintains positive relationships with reporters. This could work to her advantage in terms of generating favorable coverage, but also means that journalists will likely scrutinize her record and statements more carefully given her familiarity with how the media operates. The partisan nature of Minnesota's media landscape presents another challenge. With outlets ranging from a more liberal Minneapolis Star-Tribune to conservative talk radio and online publications, voters will receive very different narratives about Klobuchar's candidacy depending on their media consumption habits. This polarization of the media environment makes it more difficult for voters to get a balanced picture of the issues and increases the likelihood that they will simply seek out information that confirms their existing biases. Social media will also play a significant role in shaping the narrative around Klobuchar's candidacy. Both supporters and opponents will use these platforms to share information, some accurate, some not, and mobilize their respective bases. The rapid spread of misinformation on social media presents a particular challenge for journalists seeking to provide fact-based coverage of the campaign. This environment requires voters to be more discerning consumers of political information than ever before. What other high-profile political senators also transitioned from Senate to governor? Amy Klobuchar's potential transition from the U.S. Senate to the Minnesota governor's office is not without historical precedent, though such moves remain relatively rare in American politics. Examining these previous examples can provide insight into the challenges and opportunities Klobuchar might face if she decides to make this leap. One of the most recent and relevant examples is that of Mitt Romney, who successfully transitioned from being the governor of Massachusetts to a U.S. Senator from Utah. While Romney's move was in the opposite direction of what Klobuchar is considering, it demonstrates that such transitions between federal and state executive positions are possible and can be politically successful. Romney's experience also highlights the importance of establishing clear reasons for the transition that resonates with voters. Another relevant example is that of Pete Ricketts, who left his position as CEO of a major company to become governor of Nebraska and later successfully ran for the U.S. Senate. Ricketts' experience shows that voters will support candidates who can make a compelling case for why they are seeking a new position and how their previous experience prepares them for the challenges they will face. Perhaps the most direct parallel to Klobuchar's situation is that of Frank Murkowski, who resigned from the U.S. Senate to become governor of Alaska in 2002. Murkowski's transition was controversial because he appointed his daughter, Lisa Murkowski, to fill his Senate seat, a move that was widely criticized as nepotism. This example serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of managing succession in a way that doesn't appear to prioritize family or party interests over those of the public. These historical examples suggest that transitions between federal and state positions can be successful when candidates can clearly articulate their reasons for making the move and when they can demonstrate how their previous experience prepares them for the new role. They also highlight the importance of managing the succession process in a way that doesn't create the appearance of impropriety or self-dealing. For Klobuchar, the challenge will be to position her potential transition not as a step down or an escape from federal politics, but as a natural evolution of her commitment to public service in Minnesota. She will need to make a compelling case where her experience in the Senate has prepared her to address the specific challenges facing the state, particularly those related to the fraud scandal and immigration controversy. What are the national implications of Klobuchar's potential move on Democratic politics? Amy Klobuchar's decision to potentially run for governor of Minnesota has implications that extend far beyond the state's borders. At a time when the Democratic Party is struggling to define its post-Trump identity and grappling with significant losses at the federal level, her move represents a strategic calculation that could influence the party's approach to state-level politics in the coming years. From a national perspective, Klobuchar's potential gubernatorial run can be seen as part of a broader trend of high-profile Democrats reassessing their political futures in light of the party's diminished standing in Washington, D.C. With Republicans controlling the White House and making gains in Congress, state-level offices have become increasingly important as both a bulwark against conservative policies and a platform for shaping a progressive vision for the country's future. In this context, Klobuchar's move represents a strategic redeployment of Democratic talent to where it can have the most immediate impact. The Democratic Party's response to the Minnesota crisis will also be closely watched by other state leaders facing similar challenges. As more states become battlegrounds in the nation's ongoing culture wars, and as federal-state conflicts intensify over issues like immigration and healthcare, the strategies employed in Minnesota could serve as a model for other Democratic leaders seeking to navigate these treacherous political waters. In conclusion, Amy Klobuchar's decision to potentially run for governor of Minnesota comes at a defining moment in the state's political history. The twin crises of the welfare fraud scandal and the immigration controversy have created a political landscape that is both fraught with peril and ripe with opportunity. How Klobuchar navigates this landscape will not only determine her political future, but could also shape the trajectory of Minnesota politics for years to come. The questions surrounding her candidacy are significant and legitimate. Is her run a genuine attempt to address the serious problems facing Minnesota, or is it a calculated move by the Democratic establishment to maintain power in the face of mounting scandals? Does she have the independence and vision to break from the failures of the Walz administration, or will she simply be a continuation of the same policies and problems that have led to the current crises? Can she successfully transition from the U.S. Senate to a state executive position, or will the move be perceived as a step down that signaled diminished national ambitions? The answers to these questions will emerge in the coming months as Klobuchar makes her case to voters and as the campaign unfolds. What is clear already is that her candidacy represents a high-stakes gamble for both her and the Democratic Party. Success would mean retaining the governor's office and potentially positioning Klobuchar for another run at national office in the future. Failure would mean handing the governor's office to Republicans and potentially ceding control of Minnesota politics for a generation. For Minnesota voters, the choice they face in 2026 will be about more than just which candidate best represents their values and priorities. It will be about what kind of state they want Minnesota to be. One that continues on the path set by the Democratic establishment, or one that embraces a new direction under Republican leadership. It will be about whether they believe the problems facing the state can best be addressed by experienced insiders or by fresh faces with new perspectives. In the end, Amy Klobuchar's potential run for governor is about more than just one politician's ambition. It is about the future of Minnesota and about the ability of democratic institutions to respond to crises in ways that restore public trust rather than deepen public cynicism. It is about whether politics can be a force for positive change or whether it will remain a spectacle of self-interest and partisan maneuvering. Whatever the outcome of the 2026 gubernatorial race, one thing is certain. Minnesota is at a crossroads, and the path it chooses will have consequences that extend far beyond its borders. Amy Klobuchar's decision to run for governor, whether motivated by genuine public service or political calculation, places her at the center of this pivotal moment in the state's history. How she rises to the challenge will be her legacy, and it will shape Minnesota's future for years to come.
I hope this video gets you to thinking. Is running for governor the right decision for Amy Klobuchar, the Democratic Party, and the state of Minnesota? Only time will tell. If she decides to run, how will the public view her? Will she just be a continuation of the Democratic Party, or will she turn away from the sins of the past? Will the state electorate want to take a chance on her being different, or will they finally turn to the GOPs to lead the state out of all the fraud that occurred under Democrat rule in the last couple of decades? Will the public take the safe bet of a Republican administration, or will they listen to the change that the Democrats will set forth? We'll know what the public does in early November of 2026.
Limitless supply of insightful reads to expand your mind and transform your life. Look no further than Nehemiah Reset's ebook library, where knowledge meets inspiration at nehemiahreset.org ebook. Go there today to discover a wealth of valuable resources to help you on your personal and professional journey to build a biblical worldview. Learn more about the Bible and how culture is impacting your worldview. Again, the ebook library is located at nehemiahreset.org ebook. Hope to see you soon. My name is Daniel. I am one of the spokespersons for Nehemiah Reset. The prior video was sponsored by Nehemiah Reset, a 501c3. Our mission is to assist Christians in developing a biblical worldview as it pertains to relevant cultural and biblical issues. We seek to inform Christ's followers, equip them, and mobilize them in action to vote for their biblical values and actively engage in our We are also committed to help Christians and non-believers to develop a better biblical view. Nehemiah Reset produces videos and ebooks to assist members of the church in developing a biblical worldview when it comes to cultural issues. We produce videos on key topics like public school indoctrination, the woke agenda, sex education, equity and inclusion, climate change, immigration, religious freedom, and much, much more. To learn more about Nehemiah Reset or to watch our latest videos, go to our website at nehemiahreset.org or our rumble.com channel. We produce 2 to 3 videos every week. To get a weekly list of our latest videos, sign up for our weekly newsletter by going to nehemiahreset.org/email and subscribe. You can support our website by liking our videos, subscribing to our channels, or helping us reach more people through tax-exempt donations. Thanks for your help in growing God's kingdom and bringing more people to Christ. Thank you for your support and help. Come back again soon. Have a great day.